Welcome back to Limit Break 20. In today's video, we're going to be going over our very first strategy guide, the Warrior. So for those of you that don't know, the Warrior is the tanking class in Final Fantasy XIV, at least in the starter guide. When we look at the Warrior, we're going to notice that there's some really unique characteristics that are exclusive to this character sheet in the starter set. So let's dive right into the character sheet. Alrighty, so looking at the stat sheet, there's a couple of things that are important to point out. The first is that the Warrior's largest statistic is its vitality at a +5. Now, that's going to really affect some of those checks that you're going to be making, mainly outside of combat, but there might be some situations where you would make that check in combat. I haven't run into any yet, but I'm sure they will show up when the full rules release. What you'll notice is that strength is actually then its second highest attribute at a +4, and this is going to be the modifier you add to pretty much all your D20 rolls with the Warrior's abilities. So very important. +2 to dexterity, +0 to intelligence, and a +1 to mind. Now, another important thing to point out is in the secondary attributes, you'll see that the defense is 15. This is actually the highest defense of any of the characters in the starter set. And that kind of makes sense for your tank, right? If you're going to be in there in the front line taking hits, having a high defense is going to be really important. A +12 magical defense isn't anything to sneeze at either, and their move speed is 5. Now, the last thing that I want to point out on the attribute side of the character sheet is that the tank has the highest health pool out of any character. So they're at 35. The second highest up to that is 26 with the Dragoon. So there's actually a pretty big differential between the tank's HP pool and the sort of next tankiest character from the starter set. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go over the primary abilities, secondary abilities, and the instant abilities. And in order to sort of show you how these work, I'm going to be having a battle map that we're going to use in different scenarios so you can actually see how these abilities would be best utilized in actual gameplay. So the first thing we're going to look at are the Warrior's primary abilities. So the first one we're going to look at is the Warrior combo, Heavy Swing and Maim. So what this effectively is you target a single character within one square. So as you can see the Warrior here, we can target either this enemy or this enemy. And its base effect is going to deal 2 damage and inflicts enmity on the target. So remember from previous videos, enmity is the tanking mechanic to where if you inflict this enfeeblement on a character, they have a -5 penalty to hit. Now, when it shows there's combos into Storm's Path. So this effectively acts as sort of a multi-attack where you can use your Warrior combo, this first ability, and then you can go right into its second ability, which is going to be Storm's Path. And real quick, if you roll and your D20 roll plus your strength modifier meets or exceeds the target's defense, then you deal a direct hit, which is an additional 1d6 worth of damage. So with this main one, you're always going to deal at least 2 damage, but if you get that direct hit, you get to roll a d6. So after you complete this first attack, you can actually then go into Storm's Path, which is the same single target. So this Cactuar or this Cactuar. Yeah, we got Cactuars in this video. And same thing, deals 2 damage and inflicts enmity on the target, and this actually restores 2 HP. Now again, with the direct hit, you're going to deal an additional 1d6 damage. So what I would do is if I were going to be in this exact situation that you see here on the map, is I would go right into that first Warrior combo and hit this first Cactuar. Now, what you can do in Final Fantasy XIV is you can move and hit an additional target if you wanted to as well. So because I'm within range, that first Cactuar I'm going to attack, inflict enmity whether I hit or miss, and then I'm just going to turn around in Storm's Path right into this other Cactuar right here and inflict enmity on both of this. This is just sort of maxing out that damage output. Now, when we get to secondary abilities, there's going to be some things that you might want to do first, because in Final Fantasy XIV, you get a primary ability, a secondary ability, and then your instant abilities you can use on your turn or once on a character's turn, depending on what the trigger is. So now we're going to move on into their second ability, which is Overpower. So now we're going to take a look at this other scenario here. So let's say we're in a situation where two more Cactuar randomly appeared, and now we're in a situation where there's four enemies, right? This is where the next primary ability, Overpower, comes in. So as you can see here, this targets all enemies within range, and the range is a 5x5 area centered on this character. As you can see, this is a 5x5 area that is centered on this character. So in this situation, what you're going to see is this still is a strength check. So you're still targeting the target's defense. You're going to roll your d20, add your 4. But the base effect is that this is going to inflict enmity on all the targets. So while this doesn't have any base damage like the Warriors combo does, what this does do is it targets a much larger area, and it allows you to put that enmity effect on all of those characters. So in the situation where those Cactuar may have attacked either the Dragoon or the Black Mage, now they're in a situation where they're more than likely going to move towards the tank because they don't have that -5 penalty. So really, really great ability to use if you're in a situation where you need to, infect enmity on multiple targets, more than 2 that you can get to within your movement. That would probably be the best use of that ability. So the final primary ability that we're going to be going over is called Tomahawk. So let's say we're in this situation where the warrior has effectively dealt with the two Cactuar right here, okay? And it doesn't have to be the warrior, it could be the whole party. Collective effort in this game. But let's say then we see that there is one Cactuar left, and he's about to wallop on our healer, which is not something that we want. So what we then do is use our standard movement of 5 feet, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And as you can see, we're just out of range to use Overpower to sort of target that enemy in our AoE ability, because remember, that's 5x5 centered on you. But what we are in range of is Tomahawk. So this targets a single enemy, and it has a range of 5 squares. And you're going to be rolling your d20 and adding your strength modifier, trying to hit the target's defense. And the base effect is that it's going to be doing 2 damage, and it's going to inflict enmity on the target. And if you meet or exceed the target's defense, you deal an additional 1d6 of damage. So this is a way that if there's no other enemies on the battle map and you can't get close enough to use your warrior combo, this is where you'd want to use Tomahawk to inflict enmity and put out some damage on that enemy. So that's basically what we have for the primary abilities. So now we're going to move into the secondary abilities. So the first secondary ability we're going to look at is called Rampart. And what this does is this reduces all the damage you take from all abilities by 2 until the start of your next turn. So if you take a look at the situation, as you can see, there are 3 Cactuar that are surrounding our warrior. And if we know that they're all going to have enmity on them, so they're going to more than likely be attacking the tank, and we know that these are fresh enemies, we're probably not going to have any go down initially, you'd want to use Rampart. And again, whenever they hit you, whether it's a direct hit or any base damage, they're going to be reducing that damage by 2. So it's a really good ability to use if you're trying to reduce incoming damage. Now keep in mind, the limitation is only once per phase, so it's not something you can use every turn. So really important to understand your resources. And remember, phases can change in combat on a fairly regular basis. So don't be afraid to use this if you think it's going to help out. It's not so sacred that you're never going to get it back. So that's what we got for Rampart. So the next secondary ability we're going to look at is Low Blow. And this is a really important tool in the Warrior's Toolkit. Let's take a look at it. So as you can see, it targets a single enemy, and the range is 1 square. And the base effect is that it stuns the target until the end of this turn. That's important. It's the end of this turn, which is the warrior's turn. Any character stunned by this ability cannot be stunned again during this encounter. So once you hit an enemy, you can't use this again. You've got to hit a different enemy. And let's just read the stun enfeeblement really quick. As you can see, a stunned character cannot act during their turn or use their instant abilities, and all markers for which they are the creator are removed. that is the most important part of the stun feature when you are the warrior. And characters receive one advantage dice when making ability checks targeting a stunned character. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the battle map. So let's just say we have this Cactuar is going to be using 10,000 needles. I think that's the ability that they had in Final Fantasy VIII, so we're going to go with that. So let's just say they're going to use their stun attack, and it's 3 spaces long. What you can see here is that this is then going to hit the warrior and the dragoon. And this is important because now what we would have to do is we'd have to generally either move, which kind of throws us off a little bit because it now means the dragoon can't, forego his movement and use a focus if he wanted to. So instead of just having the party have to reposition and waste some resources, you can use stun, and what happens is that will immediately take away that marker. Now, again, you can't stun this character again, so on its next turn, if it uses that ability, you can't use it again. So just something to note. But I want to take a look at a couple, some unique scenarios, okay? So for one, the first thing you'd want to do is on your turn, use low blow and stun that character so you get your advantage die and then maybe follow up with a warrior's combo. So let's say we're in a situation where maybe both of these enemies are going to be targeting the both the dragoon and the black mage with that ranged attack. So one thing that the warrior could do in this situation is use low blow to take off the AoE effect of this Cactuar. So he uses his first ability, low blow, that deletes that. Then they get one advantage die on this stunned character. And remember, stun goes away at the end of the warrior's turn, so no other players get to have an advantage die once the warrior's turn's over. And then what he can do, though, is forego his movement and take a second ability and use a second low blow on this character right here. Delete. Completely negating both of those AoE effects. Now, the black mage can use focus, and also they have an ability that allows them, if they don't move, to take a second primary ability. So now the black mage doesn't have to waste some additional damage output moving. The warrior sort of taking care of that. And then what you would do is follow up with your warrior combo on this Cactuar and that Cactuar, and you would have an advantage dice on each. So that's just sort of maximizing the output as far as the using stunned and kind of putting your other players in a position to succeed. So really, really cool concepts. That's what I like about this combat system, is that it creates a lot of flexibility. So now we'll go into the third and final ability, secondary ability, excuse me, and that is going to be Berserk. So if you take a look at Berserk, what this does is your abilities deal an additional 2 damage until the end of this turn. And you can use this 3 times per phase. So if we're in a situation where both Cactuars are bunched up here, you would want to activate Berserk before using your warrior combo. And again, this resets, on a per phase, so you can use this fairly often. So basically, you then take your first swing at this one. Doesn't matter if you connect or not, you're still doing 2 damage. So you go from dealing 2 damage to a flat 4 damage, which is awesome. And then again, you would take your second swing at either one, but it's still going to add that additional 2 damage because they're 2 separate abilities when you use the combo. And that's probably one of my favorite things about some of these secondary abilities, is that when you activate them, they're going to do something no matter what. I can't tell you how many times I've played D&D, or if you're a cleric, you know this, you use a full spell slot to cast something like Guiding Bolt, and then you miss, and you've just burnt a spell slot, didn't use any damage. This system's nice because you're always going to be doing damage, and if you activate one of these abilities, it's always going to help you. So it's never like you're wasting resources, which is great. So the next thing we're going to go into are instant abilities. So the first instant ability that we're going to be looking at is called Reprisal. And this is going to be immediately before an ability used by an enemy within 2 squares is resolved. That is the trigger. And what it does is this is going to target all enemies within range, and this range is a 5x5 area centered on this character. And what this does is this reduces the damage dealt by the abilities of all targets by 2 until the end of this round. So that's a really cool ability. So if we take a look at the size of that again, so what this effectively does is when an enemy uses an ability, they can just trigger this. So every enemy now in this big square has a damage reduced by 2 until the end of this round. That is really awesome. And what's nice is that it doesn't have to be a target of the warrior. So let's just say this Cactuar is going to be using a ranged attack, right, on the black mage. The warrior, if he doesn't have enmity, which he should, if you're a good warrior, you'd have enmity on his character. But let's just say in this hypothetical situation you didn't. You could target that. You could target that Cactuar and be in a situation where the damage done to the black mage is reduced by 2. So again, another really cool ability, and these instant abilities can be used off turn. So the next instant ability we're going to go over is Provoke. And just like Low Blow, I think Provoke is probably, again, another very, very important ability that the tank has in their toolkit. So the trigger is when an enemy begins their turn, and the target is the enemy that triggered this ability. So the range is 10 squares, and what this does is this inflicts enmity on that target. So let's go back to our situation here with the white mage. So yes, obviously we could move and use our Tomahawk if we haven't used our primary ability. But let's just say we use our warrior combo to hit this Cactuar, and we maybe used focus to launch Berserk and maybe even Low Blow just to get some advantage. So let's just say we kind of did everything we could do without moving. So now what we have is a situation where, let's say this Cactuar goes to attack the white mage, and so right as this turn starts, the warrior can use Provoke to immediately inflict enmity on this target. And this is only once per phase, but this makes it so now this Cactuar has a -5 to hit. So if he can't move over to attack somebody else, he's going to just be attacking this white mage with a penalty. So again, really important ability if someone's out of range or you're in a combat where maybe the phase shifts and more enemies come and you're in a situation where you can only get 4 out of the 5 enemies with Overpower, but you need a situation where there's one more enemy but you don't want him targeting, one of the squishier characters. Go ahead and use Provoke. The next instant ability we're going to look at is Interject. So the trigger for this is an adjacent enemy, or when an adjacent enemy uses an invoked ability, or is using an invoked ability to generate a marker. So the target is the enemy that triggered this ability, and the range is 1 square. And the base effect is that this interrupts the invoked ability that triggered this ability, negating it completely once per phase. So basically, this is sort of it's kind of worded a little bit weird, but basically what this allows the warrior to do. So let's say the warrior has already used Low Blow and stunned this Cactuar, and it goes to generate an additional marker. Well, what we could do is when this Cactuar goes to use this ability, we could just use Interject and cancel this out completely, completely negating their ability to use a sort of a marker for a second time. The final ability that we're going to look at is called Thrill of Battle. And what I'll do is I'll read it to you and then I'll tell you sort of a kind of a cool situation that you can use. So the trigger is immediately before you take damage, and the base effect is that it restores 1d6 plus 2 HP and grants a barrier equaling the amount of HP restored that exceeds your max HP. And the limitation is once per phase. Let's say that this Cactuar is going to be attacking you, and let's say they don't get a direct hit. So let's just say you have Rampart invoked and the base damage is 3. So you're going to be taking 1 point of damage. What you could do is invoke the Thrill of Battle and roll a d6 plus 2 HP, and that's going to grant you a barrier. So on average, a d6 is 3.5 plus 2 is 5. So you could give yourself a little bit of kind of an overclock to your health by using this early. Now, again, another situation you would want to use this in is, let's say the white mage wasn't able to heal you, and now you need a little bit of health to sort of boost yourself back up. use thrill of battle. So a couple of different ways you can use it, but I really like that you get a barrier if you overheal yourself. And again, the limitation on this is once per phase. So um, that's it for the primary, secondary, and instant abilities. I went over limit breaks in my last video, but I will go over it really fast since it is a warrior character video after all. So what we're going to look at for their limit break is called Landwalker, and the trigger is immediately before one or more allied adventurers takes damage. And the base effect is this makes you the sole target of all the damage inflicted by the effect that triggered Landwalker and halves the damage you take rounded up, because that's how math works. If an ability triggered Landwalker, the character that used the ability suffers the damage equal to the amount of HP you lost. Okay, so let's just say uh, this Cactuar had some crazy high ability that was going to be hitting all three of these characters, and we couldn't move for some reason. We know we're going to be taking this damage, so let's just say that it's going to be dealing 11 points of damage to, let's just use round numbers actually, because I don't feel like doing that much math. So let's just say it's going to be doing 15 points of damage to each character. So what happens is if you trigger Landwalker, what will happen is that damage goes from 45 to 22 and a half, rounded up as 23 points of damage. So then the warrior would take 23 points of damage and then return 23 points of damage to the Cactuar. So I could just see this being a really awesome narrative scene where the warrior just sort of tells everyone to get behind him. He takes that damage and kind of like, channels it into like an Aether Strike and just, cuts this thing in half if it kills it. But I don't know. That's how I would sort of have that narrative be with limit breaks. And that's all I had for you for today with the Warrior Strategy Guide. So let me know your thoughts and feedback in the comments below, or if there's some tactics that you've used that have been really interesting, definitely put them in the comments because I want to hear about them. And if you like this content, feel free to attune to this channel by liking and subscribing. Until our next time, stay safe, adventurers.